snow fell in heavy sheets that night, blanketing the small New England town in a suffocating silence. 17-year-old Clara bundled herself in a thick coat and scarf, her breath forming small clouds as she trudged down the narrow, icy path through the woods. She had missed the last bus home after her part-time shift at the diner, and the shortcut through the forest was her only option. The trees were skeletal, their bare branches clawing at the dark sky like desperate hands. The cold was biting, and the crunch of her boots on the snow was the only sound in the otherwise lifeless woods. She gripped her phone tightly, using its flashlight to pierce the darkness ahead. As Clara walked deeper into the woods, she noticed something strange. The sound of her footsteps began to echo, slightly out of sync. She stopped, her heart pounding. The echo continued for a moment longer, then ceased. She spun around, the flashlight beam shaking. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. Only the wind answered, whistling through the branches. Determined to get home, Clara quickened her pace, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of her vision, and the echoes of footsteps returned, louder and more deliberate. Then she saw it. A figure standing in the distance, barely visible through the falling snow. It was tall and thin, cloaked in darkness. She froze, gripping her phone tighter. "Who's there?" The figure didn't move. Panic surged through Clara. She bolted down the path, her breaths coming in sharp, icy gasps. The flashlight's beam danced wildly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and reach for her. Suddenly, the path vanished beneath her feet. Clara tumbled down a steep embankment, landing in a snow-covered hollow. Her phone skittered out of her hand and landed several feet away, its light pointing upwards. She scrambled to her feet, her ankle throbbing, and grabbed the phone. The figure was there again, standing at the edge of the hollow, looking down at her. But now it was closer, and she could see its face, or rather the lack of one. Where its face should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface like a frost on a window. Clara screamed, limping away as fast as she could. The figure moved, not walking, but gliding soundlessly over the snow. It whispered her name, the sound soft and chilling, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Clara!" She stumbled, the pain in her ankle unbearable, but she refused to stop. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing all around her. Tears froze on her cheeks as she broke through the trees and onto the road near her house. Clara threw herself against the front door, pounding until her father opened it. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing and pointing toward the woods. "It was following me," she cried. Something was there. Her father grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the edge of the forest. There was nothing but the gently falling snow. That night, Clara lay awake, every creak of the house sending chills down her spine. She finally drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't restful. In her dreams, the faceless figure stood at the foot of her bed, its head tilting slowly as it whispered her name over and over again. When she awoke, frost covered the inside of her bedroom window, spelling out a single word. Mine. Double asterisk. The winter storm howled outside the cabin, rattling the windows with icy fingers. 14-year-old Emily sat alone, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. Her parents had gone into town for supplies, leaving her in the isolated mountain cabin. They had promised to be back before nightfall, but the storm had come suddenly, and now the forest outside was buried under a heavy blanket of snow. The power had gone out hours ago, plunging the cabin into near darkness. Emily clutched her flashlight, its weak beam her only source of comfort. The wind outside was fierce, moaning like a lost soul searching for something or someone. Then she heard it, a faint knock at the door. Emily froze. Her parents couldn't possibly be back. The snow was too deep. Another knock followed, louder this time, more urgent. She swallowed hard and crept to the window, peeking through the frost-covered glass. A shadowy figure stood on the porch. It was tall and wrapped in a tattered coat, its head obscured by a hood. The storm whipped around it, but it stood unnaturally still, as if the blizzard didn't touch it. "Who's there?" Emily called, her voice trembling. No answer. The knock came again, harder now, echoing through the silent cabin. Fear rooted her in place. She thought about calling for help, but her phone had no signal this far up the mountain. Her parents had always warned her not to open the door for strangers, but what if it was someone in trouble, lost in the storm? Gathering her courage, Emily approached the door. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The figure didn't respond. Against her better judgment, she unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The cold rushed in, stinging her skin. "Hello?" The porch was empty. The figure was gone, leaving no footprints in the freshly fallen snow. Emily slammed the door shut, locking it tightly. Her heart pounded as she backed away. She turned and gasped. Wet footprints trailed across the wooden floor, leading from the door into the kitchen. Her flashlight flickered. The room grew colder, and the fire in the hearth sputtered and died. "Hello?" she whispered, her breath visible in the icy air. A low voice answered, coming from somewhere behind her. "You shouldn't have opened the door." Emily spun around, but there was no one there. The footprints had vanished. Suddenly, the flashlight went out, plunging her into complete darkness. The wind outside roared louder, and she felt a presence, close enough that she could feel its icy breath on her neck. "Leave me alone," she screamed, stumbling toward the fireplace, hoping to reignite the flames. But as she reached for the matches, a hand, cold and skeletal, clasped her wrist. She turned to face it, her scream echoing into the storm. When her parents finally returned the next morning, the cabin was eerily silent. The firewood remained stacked, untouched, and the front door was still locked. Emily was gone. The only sign of her was a single set of footprints in the snow outside the cabin, leading deep into the woods where no one dared to follow. It was the coldest night of the year, and 16-year-old Lily was alone at home. Her parents had gone to a holiday party in the neighboring town, leaving her in their old Victorian house that creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. The snowstorm outside had trapped her inside, and the howling wind made her feel as though the house was alive, breathing and shifting. Lily sat in the living room, a blanket wrapped around her, scrolling aimlessly on her phone. The antique mirror above the fireplace caught her eye. It was tall and ornate, with a cracked silver frame. Her mother had always warned her not to touch it, claiming it was fragile. But tonight, Lily felt drawn to it. She rose from the couch and approached the mirror. The reflection was strange, the room behind her dimmer than it should have been. The firelight in the reflection flickered slower, almost unnaturally. As she stared, she thought she saw movement in the glass, something just out of the corner of her eye. She turned quickly, expecting to see someone behind her, but the room was empty. Lily laughed nervously. "Get a grip," she muttered, shaking her head. But when she looked back at the mirror, her reflection wasn't laughing. Her reflection stood perfectly still, staring back at her with wide, glassy eyes. Its lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. Lily froze. Her heart raced as her reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. Her own hands remained at her sides. "No," she whispered, backing away. The reflection tilted its head, still smiling, and mouthed something Lily couldn't hear. Then it moved, stepping forward, closer to the surface of the mirror. A sharp crack echoed through the room as the glass fractured. Thin lines spiderwebbed across the surface, and the reflection began to push against the glass, as though it were trying to break through. Panicked, Lily grabbed the fireplace poker and swung it at the mirror. The glass shattered, shards flying everywhere, but the reflection didn't disappear. It lingered, now free from the mirror's frame, its form shimmering and translucent. The room grew colder. Frost spread across the walls, and Lily's breath became visible in the air. The figure stepped out fully, its eyes dark and empty, and it whispered in a voice that sounded like wind through broken windows. "You freed me." Lily stumbled backward, dropping the poker. The figure loomed closer, its presence draining all warmth from the room. "Stay away," she screamed, but the figure only laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that chilled her to the bone. As it reached for her, the house plunged into darkness. When her parents returned the next morning, the house was eerily silent. The mirror above the fireplace was gone, replaced by smooth, frost-covered wallpaper. Lily was nowhere to be found. But if anyone stood in the living room long enough, they would see her in the frost on the walls, her terrified face forever frozen in the icy surface, her mouth open in a silent scream.